ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. Now we have a familiar face, the Scottish Family Party's Deputy Leader. Phil Holden is joining us this evening. Good evening, Phil.
Good evening, Richard.
So we had our conference on Saturday. You'd have got fed up of hearing about it in the lead-up. We encourage you to buy your tickets. So we had a good crowd there. So Phil, what was the highlight for you?
I think it was it's an amazing time to be there, because we haven't got an election coming up straight away, but just a time to really lay the foundations, I guess, for the elections coming up. And I think that thing of just being kind of visible, that came up in many talks, of just being sort of out there. And I think, as well, as we're seeing, we've kind of held fast as the family party to our values. And I think at first people were kind of shocked by what it was that we were standing for. But now, as people are seeing, these policies and the shape of them and the impact that they're having, that are coming through kind of the SNP and the other parties, that we've been standing against, I think our message looks more compelling than ever. And, to see the disarray, I think, as well, in the other parties, that there's a real chance for us to stand and make an impact at this time.
Yeah. I'll say a lot of the time with the family party, I've had the feeling that, there's this other issue that's dominating the agenda. And it's a bit frustrating. We want our issues to come to the top of the agenda. And then there'll always be another issue, But I feel at the moment is that our issues are going up the agenda worldwide.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's beginning to happen in Britain, but it is going to happen in Britain. So I think that's good. We are well placed for the way the tide's coming, I think. So that's very encouraging. Evening, John. Right, thank you. Yet another compliment for Mary's talk. The talks will be out on video over the next couple of weeks, so you'll be able to catch up if you're unable to make it. Now, Phil's going to talk to us a little bit about one of the things he talked about the conference. Talked about at the conference. But before that, we're just going to have a quick quiz. Okay, there's not many comments at the moment. I think maybe Facebook's not friends with us tonight, but we'll see. So maybe some more people will join in. Well, my question is, who said this? A representative of which party in the Scottish Parliament said this? No one denies the importance of furthering trans rights. No one denies the importance of furthering trans rights. Which party had a representative, an MSP, say that today? Was it the Greens? Was it the Lib Dems? Was it the SNP? Was it Labour? The answer is, actually, it was the Conservatives. The Conservatives spokeswoman, equality spokeswoman, I think it was, said no one denies the importance of furthering trans rights. Phil, do you deny the importance of furthering trans rights?
I mean, I think we're seeing trans rights marching forward and just eroding so many other rights, the right to believe that, there's male and there's female, and that's the same thing as there being kind of men and women. That would be at the foundation of many religions, many faiths, So I think it's really, we're seeing the exaltation of trans rights above every other right. And when we look at the conversion therapy stuff coming in, which is basically as a parent, if you don't go along with kind of transgender ideology, it's really saying that your children will be taken away from you and these kind of things. So I don't think it needs to be pushed further up the agenda.
No. I mean, the rights they're talking about is the right to make other people go along with it. Yeah, that's really what they're wanting.
And it's bullying, basically, that we have the terms kind of transphobia and homophobia and all those kind of things, which kind of makes it sound like, this is the bullying that's happening, that there's heterosexual people which are constantly, berating gay and transgender people and all these kind of things. But really, these terms themselves become bully words. They're things that, try and keep people silent in the workplace and things like that, and nobody's free to hold their own view of what gender and sexuality and these kind of things are. We're just told this is the way it works, and yet the scientists are putting their hands up and saying, no, no, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's the way that, that these things work. We've got the whole animal kingdom out there, they seem to be doing okay with their male and their female and these kind of things. So,
yeah. But I thought it really made it clear the way the Conservatives operate. Whatever issue comes along that's a bit controversial, they drag their heels. So when it comes to the vote on this Gender Recognition Act reform, the Conservatives will vote it. Well, not all of them, but most of them will vote against it. So the public gets the impression, the Conservatives are standing against it. But they're not really. They're just dragging their heels a little bit. And they're saying, okay, you're going in the right direction, but you just haven't quite got the details right. That's the thing. And they managed to sort of have their cake and eat it. The people who are against the whole idea tend to think, well, the Conservatives are speaking for me. Whereas actually what they're saying is, well, no one denies the importance of furthering trans rights. In other words, we're right on board with this whole idea. We're heading in the right direction. It's just this bill in particular isn't quite right. It was the same with the hate speech legislation. They all voted against it. But when they were discussing it in committee, the Conservatives were all saying, oh, yeah, this is quite right. We just need to get the details right. We just need to have an amendment or two with it. But the idea of hate speech legislation, we're right behind it. It's frustrating that they do get away with it because it's not challenged in the Parliament. So,
and I think that's where it's exciting to be in the family party, like you were saying earlier. That what's increasing is the contrast. That every other party is just going further and further in the progressive direction. We're kind of like, we hold to traditional values. We're probably just what people in general would think maybe like 10 or 20 years ago or something like that, what everyone would think was normal. We haven't really moved. I think that's absolutely right. With the gender recognition thing, our policy is repeal the 2004 Gender Recognition Act. So there's no such thing as changing gender, changing sex, as far as the law is concerned. So therefore, this current debate is just a non-debate. I mean, they're talking about whether they should have to wait for 3 months or 6 months or 2 years to change your legal sex. But I think the majority of people agree that you shouldn't be able to do that because it's not true. You can't change sex. But that's that. So one of the things we had at the conference, Phil spoke about making the family party visible. And one of the ways we looked at doing that was with flags. So Phil, tell us more. Yeah, so at the start of our live stream, we've got the flags that look something like this. And we've now had these flags kind of made up. And we handed quite a lot of them out at the conference. So hopefully there's a fair number of people that now have them in their kind of cellophane wrappers and things like that. And I think the important thing for them is that they don't just sit in people's, in people's boxes and things like that, that we want to get them out. And so I thought it would be good to, if you've got a flag, see if you can take it to an iconic location in Scotland that might be near you, because they should have gone out across the country at the conference. So that might be when you're up bagging a Monroe, take a flag with you, get a bit of video with that, and we can do that throughout the season. So we can have some with the snow, we can have some by famous bridges or monuments in Scotland, but really the idea would be from sort of John O'Groats to the borders, from the East Coast to the West Coast, to have lots of photos of different people that support the family party, holding up these flags. Put them on a pole if you can, and then we can start to use it for the intro for the live stream. But hopefully by the time we've got an election coming up, we can have a really good kind of montage, which means that as people are considering voting for the family party, they feel like they're part of a movement which is all the way across Scotland, really. So and they'll be used for protests, they'll be used for all sorts of other things, so yeah, it's just a way of making ourselves more visible.
Yeah, So if people haven't got a flag and they would like one, what can they do?
Well, if you missed the conference and you didn't put one up at the conference, if you've got an idea about where you might want to fly one, you could put that in the comments. Maybe we'll give a couple away tonight if we see an idea which is a good place. So if you live near somewhere which is iconic in Scotland, then drop that in the comments section.
Yeah, right. Good. Look forward to seeing those. Right, Lainey, Rishi Sunak has said he'll sort out sex, meaning biological sex, and look into sex education. Now, I would say this is another example of the Conservatives trying to look as though they're doing something, whereas are they really? How can you make sex mean biological sex when you've got a law that says people can change, well, gender, sex? I mean, but you can't work out what's the difference because it makes no sense and it's a total muddle. So we've got a law that says people can change sex. So if Rishi Sunak says he wants to make it the sex means biological sex, he only means that if he's saying he's going to repeal this law. So I think he's trying, again, it's the Conservatives trying to have their cake and eat it, sound like they're sort of against something.
Just to clarify, is the law saying that people can change sex or saying gender? Because normally in the transgender debate, people tend to go along and say, yeah, people can't change sex, but they can change gender. Is the law saying people can change sex? Do you know?
The law says gender, but I don't think anyone really knows what the two mean. And it's really confusing what they mean. With sex education, I understand that Rishi Sunak has said he wants to make it so that parents can see the resources that are being used in schools, which is good. But that already happens in Scotland. The rshp.scot resources are already available online for parents to see. And now if you say, I'm going to make it so that parents can see, that's a way of saying something without saying anything controversial. If he actually said, we're not going to have any more of this sort of teaching in schools, then that would be controversial. He'd be taking a position and people would criticize him for it. Whereas if you just say parents should be able to see it, you're not really saying anything about the content, but you're giving the impression that you're getting to grips with this issue and you're very concerned about it. So again, it's the classic Conservative tactic. You always got to be giving off the vibe that, oh yeah, we're on your side. We're looking at this issue. We're tackling it. Whereas actually, they're not.
Yeah, I think that was one of the highlights from the conference for me, actually, the pre-recorded talk that we played with the lady from Wales, who's been standing against the sex education there. You know, I'd been reading the articles the BBC had been putting out on that, and and it was really just interesting to hear her side of the story and how constantly, the BBC would basically maybe ask to interview her and then not play what she said or back out of the interview and then publish a whole load of things which were basically lies about what was happening and things like that.
There's a classic, someone from the other side claiming to have been threatened, whatever. I mean, that's just routine, isn't it? It's just, you always get that. There'll always be the story of how someone's been the victim of something. So it creates the impression that they must be the goodies, the other side must be the baddies. I mean, who knows, what abuse and threats the other side get? That would never be reported. But the side the BBC favours, they can always conjure up some sort of mistreatment or threat, and then that will be a headline of the story. When I read the report from Wales about some disturbance in a council meeting, I read it and I thought, I don't know if I believe that at all. I'd want to hear from someone who was there about what happened. And then Kimberly was saying it was just nothing remotely like what they reported had happened, which is just what you'd expect. Rigid control of the narrative.
We had that. This is a kind of theme, didn't we? There was an organization where there's somebody who basically investigated all the kind of alleged abuse of people outside of abortion clinics. And so he's got an organization and a website that would basically do freedom of information requests and get CCTV footage or whatever was available. And, and basically it would emerge that all these things that have been in the media didn't happen at all, that they were just complete fabrication. of like intimidation and things like that. You know, incidents which are alleged to have happened when the clinic wasn't open, or you know, when you look on the CCTV and there's no one there at that time, and you know, just it seems that people just make up stories, and then these kind of emotional tales are what's used to pass laws in Scotland and in other countries. Absolutely amazing.
Someone said to me once that they were advising me on Scottish family party tactics. And they said, in this day and age, you don't get a hearing until you can present yourself as the victim. You've got to come with a sob story. Once you've got a sob story, then you've got a chance of getting people to listen to you.
I don't think we can do that. I don't think it's our our attitude. No. Yeah.
Okay. Now, this was something I read today on the internet. I was quite shocked by this. It was a report from a high school in Perth, written by a parent, and they were talking about, you know, lots of the kids have got their special pronouns that they're asking to be used. Again, I mean, speak to any teacher, ask them how many transgender, transitioning, non-binary, whatever pupils there are in the school. You'll probably find the answer is quite a lot in each class, let alone the school. But then this parent said there was also a child in this school who was identifying as a cat, and the school was going along with it. Now, that this report seemed perfectly balanced and credible, but that is a new step in that direction. I hadn't heard of that going on before in a school in Scotland, but on the other hand, I mean, why not? Why not?
Why not? Exactly. I have a friend, and she was getting abuse from her partner. This was a long time ago, and to escape that relationship, she feigned insanity and ended up in the Royal Edinburgh. And she said that when she was in there was one person who thought he was Jesus, and there was another person who thought he was Satan, and they always used to fight each other. You know, and it's kind of, you know, if I was there, should I, for the person who says he's Jesus because I'm a Christian, should I say, I'll have to worship you then? You know, I don't want to offend your belief that you're Jesus. If you think you're Jesus, well, you must be, you know. And you know, clearly people might think they're anything. They might think they're a cat. They might think they're a man or a woman, or could think they're anything. But, you know, I don't think it's our job to go along with that. You know, I don't think it's helpful to kind of you know, put ourselves in that kind of, I guess, unreality, as it were.
Yeah. I think we're dealing with someone with mental health problems. I mean, sometimes I guess there's people who are so set in thinking in some delusional belief, and you realize you're not going to break through it. And so it's possible you might decide, okay, I'm just going to play along with it. You know, there's no point just having a sort of argument every time I see this person. I just need to go along with it. It seems like the kindest thing to do, because there's no reason with it. They're past reasoning, and this is what they believe. But then with transgender, it's not that. It's they're not suggesting these people are sort of deluded and past reasoning with. The idea is that they're, you know, perfectly lucid and competent, but believe this, and therefore say, we have to believe that it's true. The reason, one of the reasons I mention on this is maybe, you know, if you're a parent of a child in Perth and your child is, you know, a bit fanatical about cats, I would say there is a possibility that it might be your child who's at school has been treated as a cat and you don't know about it. That might well be happening, that the parents don't realize what's going on at school. I mean, for that individual, it's highly, highly destructive for them to lead them down that line. But for the other children as well, to see that going on, I mean, to be at school and have one of your classmates being treated as a cat by the adults. I mean,
I think at least for a cat, like you could say there are certain characteristics that makes a cat. You know, so if somebody's trying to be a cat, you know, that you could maybe identify that. The ironic thing with, I think, the transgender debate is that at the same time, people are arguing that there are no traits at all that apply specifically to men or women. That if you were to have any kind of stereotype of men and women, that would be completely wrong. That would be completely sexist. And then people saying actually those stereotypes are so strong that you need to like change gender or have surgery or something like that so that you can play along with that stereotype. And you've got these two completely contradictory arguments kind of being made at the same time. So, when you kind of try and drill down and say, well, what is a man? What is a woman? There's really no answer that anyone can kind of come up with, because anything they say would sound like it's, just being stereotypical, So, yeah.
Maybe there'll be a documentary in a few years. What is a cat? They go around asking people to define what a cat is, or something, and people won't be able to answer it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just seeing the undefinition of words. So the undefinition of man, the undefinition of woman, the undefinition of marriage and family, and all of these kind of things. And so words which are kind of strong and meaningful, they become emptied of meaning as we broaden these terms to say they just mean whatever you want them to mean.
Yeah. Right, that's what we've got there. Okay, that's great. Glad you enjoyed it. Right, so another story I've been following on in the news just the last day or two. I saw it on social media. Again, the Scottish Conservatives, they're putting out messages basically blaming the SNP for the strikes in Scotland, NHS, etc. So the Conservatives basically taking the side of the strikers, effectively. Whereas in England, obviously the Conservatives would be on the opposite side because they're the government. But even in England, the Labour Party has been very reluctant to be siding with strikers, because I think they think that's seen as a bit too hard left. A lot of people are inconvenienced by these strikes. A lot of people resent them. They think, I can't go on strike and get more money. Why should they be able to? So the Labour Party said, we need to be a bit careful of, aligning ourselves with these strikes, that we need to just, keep a distance. But then in Scotland, it's the Conservatives who are, blaming the government for it and trying to make political capital out of it. I mean, it's so transparently just tribalistic rather than rational, I suppose is my point.
I think that the rationale behind it for them is that they probably see that there's no parties to the right of them. And so the closer to the wind they can sail, the closer to the left they can be, then basically they can capture more of the vote that way. And hopefully it just means they'll be, blindsided as we come along, and we take a different approach, I think.
Yeah. It would be interesting if there was a UK-wide union called the strike, and we end up with the Scottish Conservatives saying, quite right, the way you've been treated by the SNP is appalling. Quite right, you're on strike. And in England, you've got the UK Conservative government saying, no, that this is terrible, this is unjustified, the offer's perfectly good. I mean, it's that probably wouldn't happen because there'd be different systems either side of the border, but it would happen. In terms of the mindsets of the parties, it would happen. And again, just left thinking, the Scottish Conservatives, what are their principles? What do they stand for? If they're willing to do that, it's it's quite bizarre.
I think that their principle is just they want to get votes, and they'll prostitute themselves to do whatever they can to get a vote here or a vote there, And I guess that's the difference with us as a party. You might not agree with our principles, but I hope that you can see that we have some strong principles.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what else have we had in the news? Our COP27, which hasn't loomed as large on the agenda here as COP26, obviously, because it's a long way away. But Nicola Sturgeon had a special event and gave some speeches. And now Nicola Sturgeon suggests that, global catastrophe is, you're possibly decades away. This is a real absolute emergency that we're facing, that there could be, catastrophic for the whole world. And so what does she focus on? She focuses on how many women there are involved in making decisions about climate change. So she had a special meeting where she was basically saying we need to get more women involved in the decision making. Now, I've got two issues with that. My first issue is it makes me doubt how serious she is about the issue. If you really did believe that something so catastrophic was looming, you wouldn't have any time to think about anything apart from solving the problem. You'd want the mathematicians and the scientists, etc. You'd want to know the facts. You wouldn't know what you could do about it. You wouldn't think for a moment, this is a chance to push my other, hobby horse for getting more women in. And then the other thing is, as I said before, Nicola Sturgeon is a female supremacist. She believes that the world's problems could be largely solved by just having women doing things instead of men. So she just automatically assumes if you can increase the proportion of women in any area, that's going to produce better decisions because women are either, I don't know, cleverer, nicer. I mean, who knows? Who knows? Combination of all of those things. But to me, it is just clear-cut female supremacism.
Yeah, I think that kind of, sums that up basically. That what she seems to be saying is basically that women will always make better decisions than men. The world would be in a better place if it was run by women. And we can see the success of the SNP, how well they're doing with the drugs, the education, all these kind of things. So congratulations.
Yeah. Quote of the day, comment of the day. Yeah, but how long will it be before we say we need more cats involved as well? Yeah. More diversity, identity diversity in the decision-making process. Quite right. Well, I wonder, it would be fascinating to try and pin Nicola Sturgeon down on this, wouldn't it? But it will never happen, obviously, because no journalist would do it. No other politician would do it. But what would she say if she was actually, tied to a chair and made to answer our questions? If we said,
I don't think you could ever pin Nicola down and get her to answer a question decisively.
No. I mean, does she really believe it, or does she just think this goes down really well with half of the electorate? Half the electorate, i.e. women, will love this and they'll vote for me. And the other half, men, well, they don't care. They'll just ignore it. So electorally, this is a winner. Or is it that she really believes it? I think she really believes it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's a worldwide phenomenon, those sort of beliefs. And it is bizarre as well that there's just no opposition, well, from anyone, men in particular, but anyone. I mean, lots of women as well would object to that, but it just never gets challenged. It's strange. So I suppose for politicians, if you've got two halves of the electorate, if you butter one of them up and denigrate the other one, the one that you denigrate makes no difference to you. The one that you butter up, it improves your popularity among them. Then it's pretty tempting to go along with that.
Well, I think to an extent there's a kind of a move to try and silence men as well in society. That if as a man you want to get anywhere, then you've got to be a feminist kind of thing. It kind of comes up in workplaces and things like that. That you've got to be part of the kind of feminist movement or something like that in order to get promotions and these kind of things. So. I think that lots of men are conditioned not to say what they think,
If you're a straight, white, cisgendered male and you want to get to the top, if you want to beat all those people of other races and all those women, if you want to get to the top instead of them, what you have to do is talk all the talk about all this diversity.
Yeah.
The route to the top as a straight white male is to talk about diversity all the time. That there's no other way. And so that's what they do. We've got another cracking comment here. SFP member encourages kidnapping Nicola Sturgeon. The Daily Mail. Not probably in the National. The National. Well, maybe it was the journalist from the National watched the live stream last week, and it ended up with a comment. So, maybe that will be in the National. We shall see. We shall see. Disgusting Scottish family party
Literally wants to pin down Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I mentioned this at the conference. I'm still very encouraged by it. I'll give you a chance to comment on this as well. Or Ron DeSantis in America surged to success in Florida. And I've just seen reports in the mainstream media. This is not like people commentating from a particular angle, just the mainstream commentary on him. A lot of it's been saying what were his two unique selling points, if you like. One was pro-life, and the other one was that he was against LGBT indoctrination in school. Also, like critical race theory indoctrination in schools, but LGBT indoctrination in schools. Now, I mean, that makes him sort of like Mr. Family Party, really.
Yeah.
Now, if he gets elected as the president, I mean, already that's very significant. But if he goes through and becomes the president, and they're seen as two of his central policy positions, that's very influential around the world. We've seen the way that the repeal of Roe versus Wade has had ripples. It's really affected things here. It's put abortion on the agenda. And if he becomes president as well, that's really going to be very, very powerful, I think. Have you followed that much?
Well, I followed it a bit. You know, it seems like, you know, that there were the predictions of the red wave in the States. And then Trump kind of popped his head up just before the election. And that made people a bit unsure, maybe. But it seems like for the way that DeSantis is standing for these issues, you know, just to see how well he did in Florida, you know, is I think it's encouraging for us. And I think he's been very decisive in the way that he's stood up against Disney and things like that, and saying you're not going to get special treatment for your theme parks in Florida and things like that, and hitting back, you know, when they try and you know, use their prestige to you know, silence the conservative voices in the United States, you know, and to forward their kind of transgenderism and LGBTQ kind of plus in all their programming and things like that, you know. And yeah, they characterized the law that was to stop the promotion of you know, transgenderism and homosexuality in schools. They said this was the "Don't Say Gay" bill, but it was really just trying to keep out a lot of the stuff that we have in our kind of sex education material. You know,
and it was only up to age 8. I think it was up to age 8, the law that was brought in.
Yeah. I mean, the video that we made about Scotland's sex education materials, there's LGBT plus people who commented on the video, and they said, we think it's disgusting what's being taught in the schools. Like what's being put into the curriculum, it doesn't represent what probably the majority of LGBTQ plus people would think was appropriate. It's completely activist, child sexual rights kind of material, you know. And yeah, so I really hope that a lot of people that are, you know, are being characterized as, you know, in that way, would say that this doesn't represent us. This is, you know, this is not what we see our community as being about. But yeah.
Now, so then I was thinking about that. Again, looking at commentary on the US elections, they were saying, you know, what were the most important issues for voters? People do similar polls when there's an election in Britain as well, or in Scotland. And normally it comes out in Scotland, you know, what's the most important issue for you? It often comes out as the NHS, or at the moment it would be, you know, inflation, cost of living, etc. And I think political commentators sometimes look at that and think, oh, you see, that's what's really important to people. These other things, like, you know, being pro-life or indoctrination in schools or whatever, see, they're not the top things. It's health, it's the inflation, it's cost of living. They're the top things. But the thing is, they might be the things that people say are most important, but if they can't distinguish between the parties on those issues, then they'll vote on another issue instead. So in Scotland, if you say, you know, NHS is the most important thing, well, what's the difference between the parties on the NHS? I mean, there's no difference, really. I mean, they're going to try to spend as much as they can to make it as good as they can if the money's there. So they're all the same. So even though NHS might be policy priority number one, when it actually comes to voting, and there's nothing between the parties, then other issues are going to come into play. And you see the way the mainstream parties operate. They know that the NHS is really important to people. So they've got to try and distinguish themselves from the other parties, to try and demonize the other parties one way or another. But whereas actually, it's not true. All the parties want the NHS to be as good as they could possibly make it. I mean, that's the universal policy. So I think that's interesting for us, that our issues, I say, they're going up the agenda. And even if they don't get to the top, it can still be what determines someone's vote.
Yeah. I think like a key issue could be for us independence, but not independence in the way that most people are thinking of it, but the ability for families to live an independent life without the interference of the government into their homes. That ultimately that's something we're seeing both in the United Kingdom and in Scotland. Is the government kind of interfering in the home lives of families, particularly I think like with these conversion therapy laws and things like that, and I just see that as being a far more important issue than the next election being fought over some kind of fake independence referendum, between Scotland and the United Kingdom. What difference does it make if you're part of Scotland or the United Kingdom if at the end of the day your family is not free to make decisions about how you bring up your kids and how you live your lives? And so this idea that you'd be owned by the state, is not good.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicholas, you're going to I'm a Celebrity. That's to drop her a message and suggest it. That would be entertaining. Now that's a few other news stories. There's been a news story around today, actually. I don't know if you've seen this. Someone's been arrested in Scotland because they're a Holocaust denier, a French person. So I assume Holocaust denial must be illegal in France. So they've been arrested and taken back to France to face charges. What's your take on that? I mean, Holocaust denial isn't. I mean, the first thing to say, I think, is I've got no time and no inclination at all to any form of denying the Holocaust. I've looked into some of the arguments people put forward, but I don't accept any of it. So I just accept there's a mainstream view of it. But what's your view about countries that have made that illegal to deny the Holocaust?
I'm not sure on that. Like I think that in terms of freedom of speech and I'd say I'm not freedom of speech absolutist, that everybody can say whatever they like, but I think we need much more freedom of speech than we have. What's your take, Richard? You say what you think, and I'll
my take is, I think when it comes to these things, having the people that get called conspiracy theorists, mavericks, the value in those people is that they're the ones who will be tenacious and they'll really try and get to the bottom of things. And sometimes they'll be proved right. And if it wasn't for people with that mindset, who are maybe a bit contrary and really determined to prove themselves right, if it wasn't for people with that mindset, we wouldn't get to the bottom of a lot of issues. So that serves a valuable function. The danger of it is that when these people haven't actually got the full evidence of what they believe in, if they end up amassing a huge following, then that's obviously not a positive thing. Now, if the erroneous belief that huge numbers of people start taking on board isn't particularly important, then that's maybe neither here nor there. But a lot of beliefs are important. They do have like real world consequences. So if you've got a large portion of the people saying they reject the Holocaust, would that necessarily make them susceptible to anti-Semitism? I'm not sure it necessarily would. I think a lot of people who do want to deny the Holocaust, they are driven by anti-Semitism. I'm not sure absolutely everyone. I mean, maybe some people have looked at it without an anti-Semitic motivation, and they've come to those conclusions. But the idea of making it illegal, I tend to think it's counterproductive, because you're going to make martyrs out of people, and your narrative is stronger when you say, look, I'm the bold hero trying to speak the truth, and the authorities are out to get me, because they can't win the argument, so they have to try and shut me up and put me in prison. So my personal take on something like Holocaust denial, I don't think it ought to be illegal. I think that is counterproductive.
I think it's a fringe view in the UK, basically. So I guess it's maybe something that doesn't need legislation, other than at the point that it becomes something that's abusive, like it's led to something which is causing threatening behavior and things like that. But I think it is a sort of an interesting question. Like, obviously the reason it's a big issue is because in the past we have seen the Holocaust, and that happened through, I guess, the stirring up of hatred and things like that, but I think when you take that and then you say, well, anything is, should be illegal, because it could potentially be stirring up hatred. I think that's not right. And you do need the freedom to discuss things, that certainly, I think, like, the view of Holocaust denial should be tackled straight on with the arguments and the evidence that it took place, and I think it can be proved fairly easily that the Holocaust took place. So
it's like all these things. When you get someone who's done, maybe 100 hours research, hundreds of hours of research on it, and they present a case to you, that you or I would find it very difficult to respond to it, because we don't know what they're saying. We don't know what they're leaving out. We don't know the context. So if we just heard one side from someone who was, had really looked into it a lot, building up his case for Holocaust denial, but we probably, on a lot of points, we wouldn't be able to argue against him, but we'd be perfectly rational in saying, okay, we don't know the answers to your points, but still, we believe that there are answers to them, and it's more rational at this point in time to believe that the whole, basically academic establishment, or the authorities, all the many countries involved in it, all the personal testimonies, etc., that we're relying on those rather than these arguments that you're presenting. So I don't like the thought of there being an academic in a university who wants to do some research into an aspect of the Holocaust where he thinks maybe the official account isn't right, and he feels he can't do it because it would be... So
Greg Mayer's got an interesting point in the comments, if you put that up. So he says, the stirring up of hatred in the case of the Holocaust was done by the state and not by fringe people. And so here we've got an example of where the state is saying, this is the official policy, and if you go against it, then you're in trouble, basically. So they're saying, this is the view that you must have, and anyone who goes against that, that you're in trouble if you're hiding Jews or you're doing any of those kind of things. Then, and so, I think we're kind of seeing that in Scotland with transgenderism and things like that. If you're somebody who doesn't subscribe to transgender ideology, then you're viewed as being like a Nazi or something like that, and compared to Hitler and these kind of things. But the reality is that actually it's the kind of suppression of one view.
I think there's talking about the Nazis, but the Nazis obviously started as a fringe movement, if you like. They became the government. It didn't turn nasty as the government, if you like. It was nasty and took over the government, which is not to say it can't happen the other way around. I'm sure it can happen in all sorts of different orders. But I spoke a bit at the conference in my speech about just the total control of the narrative, with the media and the government basically in sync. When I say the government, it's not just the government, it's the opposition parties as well, in sync. I use the example of some of the things to do with COVID. I mean, in particular, that there was the point where if you said, you thought it was a lab leak, then that was seen as a really wild, not just wild, but you were a bad person if you're saying that. It's maybe even a bit racist to be suggested that this was leaked from a laboratory in China. It was just natural. Whereas now the official report that the American government's commissioned is saying that they think it did leak from a lab in China. And just the total reversal. And it's basically governments and, well, the media political establishment being in the habit of thinking it's their job to control the public narrative so rigidly, because to allow alternative viewpoints is really dangerous. And I think that's something that's really taken a lot of steps forward during the pandemic. I think governments have really got into that way of thinking, that it's for everyone's good. We have to make sure everyone's thinking the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like something you can see throughout history. It's like if you looked at like the kind of heresy trials, which I think that you brought up, and things like that you'd have in the past, that basically where you have one group which has a lot of power, and they use that to basically with their the force of violence and the control that they have to say this is the only view that people can have. I think the problem that you have is that even if you get outward conformity to that view, inwardly people believe something different.
Apparently that's the case in Iran, big time. When people do surveys of public opinion in Iran, and it's genuinely anonymized, and people are actually confident that they can answer honestly, Iran is not a Muslim majority country.
Yeah,
people suggest that a majority of the population don't actually, in the heart of hearts, regard themselves as Muslims, and maybe that's part of what's coming through in the unrest there. Just going back to what you're saying though about sort of government overreach and crushing views that they don't like. I mean, that's part of what human rights are all about. That was the idea of human rights. It was going to limit the power of the government to mistreat its own people, if you like. So in a democracy, if one group wins, human rights prevent that group from mistreating other groups, which is really important. So at their most noble and original ambitions, that's what human rights were all about. But since then, they've been interpreted more and more broadly by more and more clever lawyers, and they've become a problem in lots of ways. But at the heart of it, that's what it's all about, to rein in those excesses of government. And are they successful in doing that? I think in some cases they are. In some countries, I think if you've got a tyrannical government and human rights are on your side, if you've actually got as a Western democracy like Britain, then generally human rights just produce nonsense cases and would have been better off without them.
Yeah, so like I think the way that I view the rights thing is probably quite different, because I guess as a Christian, I see things as being often to do with responsibilities and not with rights. And so when you look at, maybe the Bible's teaching, it has things like don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery. And those are things that you kind of know when you've done them. It can be clearly seen that this has been done. But when you ascribe a bunch of rights to people, like I have the right to food, I have the right not to be offended, I have the right to do this, then you end up with a series of, that everybody infringes all of those things all the time. And at the end, you just end up picking winners, according to what your personal belief is or something like that. So with kind of religious freedom and say transgender or LGBT rights, that you've got something like the Bible that would say that marriage is between one man, one woman for life, and then you'd have the LGBTQ stuff, which would say we've the right to marry as much as anyone else, or as to have sex outside of marriage and all those kind of things. And at the end of the day, that basically, you have to choose between those two things, like the the LGBT movements at the moment are saying, well, if the Bible says it's wrong, to have homosexual sex, then that whole viewpoint, must be censored. That we must kind of rewrite the Bible to take that out of it. And that's essentially what's happening with kind of the conversion therapy laws. So it's basically saying, where the Bible would say, there were many people in Paul's day who became Christians and they were homosexuals before that, and they moved away from that way of living. That today people would say, well, that must be nonsense because that goes against my system of beliefs. That must be impossible. That could never have happened. And so at the end of the day, like when it comes to rights, you have to choose between two groups, and it might just depend on who's in power. That if it was a group which favored LGBT people, then it would take one view. If it was a group that favored a Christian viewpoint, it would take another, or something like that. And that's why I think,
in theory, rights are supposed to avoid that situation. They're supposed to avoid the majority.
The rights basically they end up, especially as you just keep adding rights, that they become more and more vague.
The thing people make them up like over a cup of coffee, and they will speak about the right to something, whereas all they mean is, we think it should be given to people, or they should be allowed. So people use rights language. There's nothing to do with any.
Sort of like, Jesus, he says, go and feed the hungry. That's quite it's given as an obligation, as something that you should do, that's good to do. But it's your free choice to do it. It's not that people have necessarily the right to food, but you have the obligation to look out for people who are hungry and to give them food. If you have more, that's that's your obligation to do these things. And I see this kind of coming up in the kind of arguments over food banks and things like that, and soup kitchens. I just find it quite disturbing that when maybe Nicola Sturgeon would speak about these things, it would be like, it's shameful that people are going to these food banks. It's shameful that people are receiving charity and things like that, as if it's more honourable to borrow millions of pounds from the next generation and spend it, and to, as it were, forcibly take that money and then give it to others from the government. Having been involved in kind of soup kitchens and these kind of things, that it's not just food that you provide, it's fellowship, it's love, it's those kind of things, and I don't think you get that same thing through a government agency. And so, like, trying to draw out that this is a thing of stigma, I don't think it's helpful. You should be commending people that are getting involved and encouraging more people to do that. That's the way that we'll pull through, because there really isn't the money in government. There isn't the money there to get us through the problems that we see ahead.
Yeah. I mean, just go back to the idea of rights. I mean, things like the right to practice your religion. But the people who wrote that, what they'd have been having in mind is some nation where the government says, for example, we're a Buddhist country. You're not allowed to have any sort of other place of worship or to practice any other religion because we're a Buddhist country. So the idea of the rights is, it says that the government, basically, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to tell your population what religion they can follow. But then it becomes a right to practice your religion. But then that means, what does that mean? That means all sorts of things in different contexts. I think they'd be a lot clearer if they'd have put them in the negative and said the government is not allowed to tell people that they can't practice their religion, that they can't gather to worship or gather to practice their religion. But the classic illustration I use sometimes is, let's say you've got some sort of tin pot regime somewhere, and they're using sleep deprivation to torture their prisoners to get them to confess. And the United Nations finds out about it and says, right, this is terrible. right, we're going to institute the right to sleep. Everyone's got the right to a good night's sleep. That'll sort out these sleep deprivation torturers. And after then, the torturer just ignores it and they carry on regardless. But then some disgruntled sort of ex-wife sues her ex-husband for £100,000 for keeping her awake snoring for the last 10 years. Whereas
so
if
you want to define what the torture is and say, you can't waterboard people or something like that, and then you've got a clear law with clear, obligations not to do something. Whereas if it's a right to, not be offended, or a right to my personal space or something like that, that it's down to somebody's subjective feeling as to whether that's been violated or not.
See what they're like, though. I mean, if you're the government, if you say, "Oh, we're giving you rights," people think, "Oh, wow, that's nice. How kind of them." Whereas if you say, "Right, we've got some rules here," people think, "Oh, that's not really, that's a bit restrictive." Or if you're of a very anti-authoritarian bent, then you'll think, "Oh, telling people they're not allowed to do things. Oh, we don't want that." Or giving people rights. Oh, that's really great. That's what we want to be. We want to be giving people rights. But when it comes to it, they don't work in practice. It just becomes a field day for the lawyers because they're vague, they're hard to interpret, and as you say, they miss out on their intention often with the more straightforward way of putting things. Is what you ought to do, or what you need to do, or what you shouldn't do, which are much clearer ways of saying it. But rights are vague, and so the lawyers love them, campaigners and activists love them. Because you never know what you can manage to get into out of a human right in a court case. And it needs reining in my view. Right, I've got some comments here. What have we got? Yeah, rights language. In the Scottish Parliament, say they make up rights on the hoof. And there was someone, a couple of years ago now, an SNP MSP stood up and she said, "Children have got a right to a bicycle." What's that even mean? Does that mean the government's going to give a bicycle to every child, whether they want the one or not? So they just make it up as they go along. The other thing with rights as well is they pop up on both sides of every argument. Every time someone says, "I've got a right to something," the person on the other side never says, "Oh, okay, fair enough." They'll generally say, "No, but I've got a right to this" instead. And if you start with rights language, it doesn't really allow for any compromise. You can't really meet in the middle. If one person said, "I've got a right to this," the other one says, "No, I've got a right to this." I mean, you can't compromise. You can't say, "Okay, I've got half a right and you've got half a right, so let's meet in the middle." So it makes for a very confrontational ethos in society, and I think that's what's definitely happening. A bike right, indeed, it was. Right, time is very nearly gone. Let's have a look if there's just one more. There's one more thing I'll just throw in. The World Cup. The virtue signaling over the World Cup is going into overdrive. And all sorts of corporations, sporting authorities, etc., are making it their job to try and emphasize that they reject the teachings of Islam. I mean, they don't want to say it like that they'll do anything other than say that. But what they're effectively saying is we need to make it really clear that we think Muslims are wrong. This whole World Cup is tainted because it's in a country where there are Muslims that believe what Muslims believe. And so us good people need to make it really clear that we reject what Muslims believe. That's what people are saying. I mean, normally you think that'd be really controversial, but I hope Muslims are realizing where they come in the pecking order, because politicians are often trying to butter up Muslims and cozy up to them and say all sorts of good things about them to try and keep them on side. But when it comes to the crunch, you can see the league table and Muslims are not at the top of it. Let's put it that way. Have you seen any of the events around that? Have you been following that at all, Phil?
Yeah, I did see it in the news and things like that. And so, I saw that, who is it that's gone out to Qatar? That one of the politicians has gone out basically, and he's been criticised for going, and saying how can you go out, when LGBTQ rights are not respected and things like that, So yeah, like I think that there are a lot of issues around Qatar, in terms of
Oh, yeah.
it hosting the World Cup. That the way that many people have been killed in constructing the stadium, the what was happening with the bribes that seemed to be going on behind the scenes in Qatar getting it in the first place.
Yeah.
So like all manner of shady things going on. Yeah. And
But
I
they
think
haven't caused as much of a fuss as this issue.
people are bringing those things up as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's it's an interesting thing where the world of politics and sports meets. I think it would be good if sports was really just sports and transcended the politics. And that you just got nations together to participate in sport. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, if the political media establishment is so horrified that the Muslims in Qatar hold Muslim values, should they not be concerned about bringing people with Muslim values to come and live in Britain? Surely that should be equally concerning to them, but they would never think that way. Month-long football tournaments, and they want to challenge an entire country's values and beliefs. Yep, correct. No, I was wondering, Muslims in Britain, are they thinking, right, should we be speaking out about this, or are they just embarrassed, or I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they're thinking. But to be so harsh against what is obviously and transparently mainstream Muslim belief, that is what's been absolutely lambasted through this. And the tension there, it's just that no one points it out. No one's going to be put on the spot and said, what you're criticizing here is mainstream Muslim belief. What's your message to Muslims? Are you telling them you believe their belief system is appalling on this point? That's what needs to be asked to someone. But
yeah,
it just doesn't happen. It's like the media are their pals. The media are tough on some issues. They'll be really challenging on some issues. But an issue like this, they disappear.
I'm going to have to go. My dog's barking.
It is 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
As well. So our time is up. So, right, thanks for joining us. You better go now. Go and look after the dog. Right, thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for your comments. We've been able to get a few of them, and those of you watching later as well.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.